My name is Caleb Marsh. My brother's name is Daniel Marsh. We are respectively 61 and 58 years old. We were born and raised on a 40-acre farm in the hill country of eastern Tennessee, in a county where people have farmed the same ground for 4 and 5 generations, and where privacy is not considered a virtue so much as a basic structural feature of how life is supposed to be organized. You keep your business on your land. You do not go looking for what isn't yours, and you do not, under any circumstances, share what goes on behind your fence line with people who have no stake in it. We kept that principle for 20 years. We kept it so well and with such discipline that there are people who knew us throughout those 2 decades, neighbors, co-workers, Daniel's ex-wife before the divorce, my daughter from my first marriage who visited every summer, who had no idea that the barn at the back of our property, the one our grandfather built in 1947, and that we always called the old hay barn to distinguish it from the newer equipment shed, was occupied for 20 years by something that was not hay. In the fall of 1983, we gave shelter to a Bigfoot. I understand how that sentence lands. I have rehearsed it for years, not to make it more believable, because there is no version of that sentence that is going to be easily believed by a stranger who wasn't there, but to make it accurate, because the word shelter is the right word and it matters. We did not trap it. We did not study it. We did not report it. We gave it a place to be when it needed one, and it stayed, and we kept the secret. And for a long time, for most of those 20 years, we were not entirely sure whether what we had was a burden or a grace. Then we found out what it had been doing, and the question of burden or grace stopped being relevant, because what we found restructured the preceding 20 years so completely that the two of us spent the better part of a week barely able to speak to each other. Not from anger, not from blame, but from the particular speechlessness of people who have discovered that the story they thought they were living was a different story entirely. That the leading character in their lives, the one they had protected and fed and lied for and organized their daily existence around for 2 decades, had been something other than what they believed. What it had been doing and why, and what it means about what these creatures are. This is what I am going to tell you. Daniel has read every word of this account, and he agrees with all of it. That matters. In 40 years of being brothers, Daniel and I have disagreed about most things that can be disagreed about. We do not disagree about what happened in 1983, or in the 20 years that followed, or in the autumn of 2003 when we found the truth. We have been silent for 21 additional years since then. That silence is over now. Make of what follows what you will. The first week of October 1983, I was 39 and Daniel was 36. Our parents had been dead for 6 years. Our father went first, a heart attack, in the North Field in the summer of 1976, and our mother followed 18 months later. In the way that sometimes happens when people have been the same unit for so long that the absence of one creates a condition the other cannot sustain. We had inherited the farm jointly and had worked it jointly since then, the way brothers on inherited land sometimes do, without formal agreement, without documented division of responsibilities, simply by the accumulation of habit and the mutual understanding of two people who have known each other their entire lives. We ran a small beef cattle operation, 30 head of Black Angus in the lower pasture, and a kitchen garden that was more for personal use than income. The real income came from Daniel's work as a diesel mechanic at the Whitfield County Equipment Dealership 6 miles down the highway, and from my part-time work as a building contractor. The farm was not a livelihood. The farm was a home, the ground our family had been on for generations, and keeping it was not a financial calculation. It was a statement of identity. What most people don't understand is that the farm's location matters enormously to this story. Our property backs against a ridge of the Appalachian foothills, not the high wilderness of the Smokies, but the older, quieter, deeply forested hill country that runs along the Tennessee-Georgia border, where the hollows go deep and the timber is old enough that you can walk for an hour without hitting a property line. We had grown up knowing those hills the way you know the rooms of your own house. We had hunted them with our father since we were old enough to carry a rifle. We knew the animals in them, and we knew the sounds they made, and we had, independently and at different times in our lives, seen things in those hills that we had never discussed with anyone outside the family. Things that moved too large and too upright for any animal we could name. We did not call these things by any name. We filed them in the category of things the hills contained that were not our business, and that had, as far as we could tell, no interest in making themselves our business. This is the Eastern Tennessee hill country approach to the unexplained. You note it, you respect it, and you go about your day. On October 4th, 1983, a Saturday morning, Daniel found it in the old hay barn. He had gone out before dawn to check on a heifer that had been off her feed for 2 days, taking the path along the back fence that ran past the hay barn on the way to the lower pasture. The barn door was open, not broken open, not forced, but standing open in a way that suggested the latch had been worked deliberately from the outside by something that understood how latches worked. Daniel stood in the doorway with his flashlight and found a Bigfoot sitting in the far corner of the barn, behind what remained of the previous year's hay bale stack, with its back against the wall and its knees drawn up to its chest, occupying itself with the particular stillness of a very large creature that is trying to make itself as small as possible. He came and got me. I want to describe what we both saw when I got there, because the description matters, and because the two of us have compared notes on it many times over the years to make sure we are remembering the same thing. It was a female. We were both fairly certain of this from its build, which was large but differently proportioned than the male specimens reported in most accounts we would later read. The hair was dark brown, almost black, with a coarser texture than human hair, but finer than most animal coats I had handled in 40 years of farming. The height, sitting with knees drawn up, was difficult to estimate, but I put her at 7 to 7.5 feet standing, based on the relative proportions of the torso. The weight I could not estimate with any confidence. Substantial. The face turned toward us when Daniel's flashlight found her, and what both of us registered, independently, simultaneously, confirmed later in comparison, was not aggression, not the territorial display of a cornered animal, something that was, if we are being honest, closer to exhaustion and relief than anything else. The face of a creature that had been moving for a long time through difficult circumstances and had found a place that felt, for the first time in some while, like it might be safe enough to stop. She was injured. The left shoulder, we would see this more clearly in daylight, had been damaged, not from any cause we could identify with certainty, but in a way consistent with a significant impact or fall. She was holding it carefully, the way anyone holds an injury, close to the body, minimizing movement, protecting it from contact. Daniel and I looked at each other in the way that we have looked at each other across a lifetime of unexpected situations. The silent, immediate conversation of two people who have been each other's primary reference point since childhood. The conversation lasted perhaps 4 seconds. What it contained was roughly, "This is real. This is happening. What do we do?" What we did was close the barn door and go inside and make coffee and talk until the sun came up. And by the time the sun came up, we had made a decision that would govern the next 20 years of our lives. Here's why this changed everything for us, and why understanding the decision we made in our kitchen on October 5th, 1983, is essential to understanding everything that followed. We were not naive men. We were not easily frightened, and we were not easily impressed. We were fourth-generation Tennessee farmers who had grown up in a tradition that was skeptical of authority by both temperament and historical experience, who had grown up in hills where the rule was that what happened on your land was your business and the business of no one else, and who had, separately and over many years, seen enough of those hills to understand that they contained things that official maps and official science had not accounted for. The question was, never do we report it. We were never going to report it. The question was, what do we do with it while it's here? And how long is it going to stay? And what do we tell people? We made 4 decisions that morning. First, we would not approach her or disturb her until she made some indication of what she wanted. Second, we would leave food and water near the barn door and let her determine the terms of any contact. Third, we would tell no one, not our neighbors, not our pastor, not Daniel's girlfriend at the time, who became his wife within the year and was divorced from him within the decade. Not anyone. Fourth, if she showed signs of wanting to leave, we would open whatever gates or barriers needed opening and let her go without obstruction. We followed all 4 of those rules for 20 years. The 4th one never came into play. She didn't leave. She healed. The shoulder took approximately 6 weeks to recover to full function, based on our observation of her movement, and she didn't leave. We began to understand somewhere in the 2nd month that she wasn't staying because she couldn't go. She was staying because she had made a choice. And that understanding, the understanding that her continued presence was a decision she was making rather than a circumstance she was enduring, was the first significant shift in how we understood what we were dealing with. The food arrangement evolved quickly from our initial leave and retreat approach to something considerably more direct. By November of 1983, she was accepting food from our hands, not immediately, not without the careful approach and the slow extension and the patient waiting that the situation required, but accepting it, which meant she had assessed us and concluded that direct contact was acceptable. The first time she took food from my hand, a head of cabbage, which she had shown preference for over the other vegetables we had tried, I felt a shift in my chest that I did not have language for at the time, and that I have spent 40 years trying to describe accurately. The closest I can come is this. It was the feeling of being trusted by something that had very good reason not to trust, that had made a careful and considered assessment of the situation and arrived at a judgment in my favor. It was the feeling of having been seen and found acceptable by a mind that was not mine and not human. And it was more significant in the moment of experiencing it than I had any framework to accommodate. Our observations consistently showed in those first months a pattern of behavior that was systematically more complex and more intelligent than anything we were prepared for. She watched us work, not from hiding, openly, from the barn doorway or from the fence line near the barn, with an attention that was clearly purposeful. She was learning our routines, learning the rhythms of the farm when we came and went, which areas were active and which were quiet, the sequences of our daily work. By spring, she knew our schedule better than most people who worked with us every day. By the spring of 1984, we had established something I can only describe as an arrangement, not a friendship. That word is too reciprocal and too easy, and it implies an equality of terms that wasn't accurate, and not simply a coexistence. That word is too passive for what it actually was. An arrangement, a set of mutual understandings arrived at through observation and experiment and the gradual accumulation of trust that governed how the three of us shared a 40-acre farm in eastern Tennessee without any of the parties involved being harmed by the arrangement. She lived primarily in the old hay barn. We set up a sleeping area for her, large, deep bedding of hay and old blankets, screened from the main entrance by the remaining hay bale stacks. We left her food twice a day, morning and evening, vegetables from the kitchen garden, supplemented by meat scraps, and in winter, when the garden was down, by purchased produce that we charged on the farm account under the line item for livestock supplemental feed, which was technically not untrue. We maintained the barn so that it was dry and weatherproof. We did not introduce any artificial heating, but we made sure the gaps in the siding were filled before each winter. In return, and I use that word knowing its implications and I stand by them, she left us alone in every meaningful sense of the phrase. She did not interfere with the cattle. She did not damage the property. She did not make sounds that would draw attention during daylight hours when neighbors or visitors might be present. She was, in the most precise sense of the word, discreet. And her discretion was not the discretion of an animal instinctively avoiding exposure. It was the discretion of a being that understood the stakes of exposure and had made a considered decision to protect them. This creature holds a secret about her own intelligence that we began to understand in that first year, but that we wouldn't fully grasp for 2 more decades. And that understanding, when it finally arrived complete, rewrote everything. In the spring of 1984, what we understood was this: she was smart. Smarter than we had expected, smarter than any non-human animal we had ever encountered, smart in a way that showed up daily in small observations and adaptations and responses. What we did not understand was the full depth of what that intelligence was being used for. Managing the secret in daily life was the constant low-grade work of those years. Every visitor to the farm required a calculation. Who were they? How long would they be here? Would they have reason to go near the back of the property? And if they did, would they see anything or hear anything that would require an explanation we were not prepared to give? Daniel's marriage in the spring of 1984 was the most complex single challenge of the first decade. His wife, Patricia, was a practical and observant woman from 2 counties over who had grown up on a farm herself and who therefore had no particular reason to find farm outbuildings unfamiliar or to stay away from them. The story we developed, that we kept a number of hogs in the old hay barn, that they were poorly tempered and not safe to approach, that the smell was such that Patricia had no reason to want to go in there, held for 3 years before Patricia decided she was tired of a marriage to a man with a significant portion of his life locked behind a barn door she wasn't allowed to open. The divorce in 1987 was, in Patricia's understanding, about Daniel's emotional unavailability. She was not wrong. She simply did not know the form that unavailability had taken. There were things Daniel could not tell her that shaped every day of their 3 years together. There are costs to a secret that go beyond the keeping of it. The secret shapes you. It shapes what you can say and what you cannot say, what you can share and what you must hold back, who you can fully be with the people who are closest to you. Danielle paid those costs for 3 years, and then Patricia paid them when she ran out of reasons to stay. I never married during those years. This is not a coincidence. Here's what 20 years of living with something means in practical terms. It stops being remarkable. Not because it ceases to be extraordinary in objective terms. A 7-foot hominid in your barn is extraordinary in objective terms on any given day of any given year. But because the human mind is built for habituation, and what is present every day becomes, at the level of daily experience, ordinary. The first year was extraordinary. The second year was extraordinary, but less so. By the 5th year, checking on her in the evening was as ordinary a part of our farm routine as checking the gate on the lower pasture. This habituation is something I want to describe carefully because it is important to understanding how the discovery we made in 2003 was able to occur. How 2 men who were paying daily attention to something could still have missed what was right in front of them. The answer is, you stop looking at what is ordinary. You look past the ordinary to the potentially extraordinary. And what had ceased to be extraordinary was her presence itself, so that what we were tracking in our daily observations were changes from her baseline, behavioral changes, physical changes, changes in her routine, rather than the baseline itself. By 1986 or 1987, the nature of her intelligence had revealed itself in ways that went well beyond what we had understood in the first year. She had by that point learned our names, not spoken them, but she used distinct, consistent vocalizations to refer to each of us separately, vocalizations that she deployed before she could see us, when she heard our footsteps approaching the barn, that were differentiated in a way that made clear she had assigned us individual identifiers. The sound she used for me was different from the sound she used for Daniel. This was not random variation. It was naming. She had also learned the farm's seasonal calendar with a precision that went beyond simple routine adaptation. She knew when the cattle needed rotating to new pasture before we moved them, based on behavioral cues in the herd that we ourselves sometimes missed until she made it clear that she had noticed by positioning herself at the relevant gate before we had yet made the decision to open it. She knew, by some sensory mechanism we never identified, when weather was coming that our instruments had not yet detected. Not with the general restlessness of animals before storms, but with specific preparatory behaviors, reinforcing her sleeping area, moving food stores to elevated positions inside the barn, that she performed in the 24 hours before significant weather events, with a regularity that became, for Daniel and me, a more reliable forecast than the television meteorologists. She was not just living on our farm, she was participating in it, in ways that were subtle enough to remain below the threshold of what we had decided was her baseline, and therefore below the threshold of what we were actively noticing. She was engaged with the operation of the farm as an active participant. This is the thing, looking back, that I should have been asking questions about. The thing I should have pushed past the ordinary to examine. I did not. We did not. We were grateful for the help in the way that farmers are grateful for good weather and healthy soil, as a background condition of a life that is working rather than as something requiring investigation. And she continued, consistently and without drama, to provide that help while we continued, consistently and without examination, to accept it. In the early 1990s, something changed in her behavior that we noticed but did not correctly interpret. She began to spend more time at the eastern edge of the property, the edge closest to the ridge, the edge where our land met the tree line of the foothills. Not to leave. She had had 24-hour access to the unguarded eastern boundary since the first year, and had never used it to leave permanently, but to communicate. We understood this at the time as contact with others of her kind, the occasional long-distance exchange of signals that seemed natural for a social species living in isolation from its group. We did not find it alarming. We found it honestly somewhat heartbreaking, the picture of a creature maintaining whatever thread of connection remained to a social world it had voluntarily stepped back from, to live in a barn with two bachelor farmers. We left her to it. We did not ask questions. We should have asked questions. Our observations consistently showed, through the middle decade of the arrangement, the 1990s, broadly speaking, a stabilization of the relationship into something that neither Daniel nor I had language for, and that we therefore described to ourselves in the only available terms: family. She was not family in any technical or biological sense. She was not family in any way that the word family, as used in human society, would recognize. But in the functional sense, in the sense of a being whose well-being you track daily without being asked to, whose moods you read without deliberate effort, whose absence from the expected place triggers a worry that is not rational, but is also not resistible. She had become as close to family as anything on that farm. She was sick twice in those years that we knew of. The first time was in the winter of 1993 to 1994, a cold and wet winter that hit the hill country hard and that the cattle did not come through particularly well. She developed what appeared to be a respiratory infection in February, a labored, crackling quality to her breathing that lasted 3 weeks, and that put both of us through a worry we had no good outlet for. We could not take her to a veterinarian. We could not call a doctor. We did what we could. We brought a portable heater into the barn for those 3 weeks, which we had never done before, and we added honey and dried ginger to her food in the folk remedy tradition of our grandmother's medicine cabinet. She recovered. Whether our interventions helped or whether she recovered on her own timeline regardless, we will never know. The second illness was in 1997 and briefer, a wound that became infected. She had been spending more time at the eastern tree line that month and came back one morning with a gash on her thigh that she showed us with a directness that still surprises me in memory. She showed it to us the way you show an injury to someone you trust to help. Actively presented, not concealed. Daniel cleaned and wrapped it, and she sat through the entire process with a patience that was absolute and that I have always interpreted as evidence of a trust fully established by 14 years of living with us. What most people don't understand about 20 years is what the time does to you emotionally when it is organized around a secret. The secret doesn't get easier. You get better at carrying it. The way you get better at carrying any weight you carry long enough, your posture adjusts, your muscles accommodate, the compensation becomes habitual. But the weight doesn't reduce. It compounds because the longer you carry it, the more the secret has organized around itself, more decisions made in its service, more relationships shaped by its existence, more of your life's architecture built on the foundation of a thing you cannot openly acknowledge. By the late 1990s, Daniel and I had both organized our social lives, such as they were, around the farm's requirements in ways that had narrowed those lives considerably. Neither of us had maintained close friendships in the way that people who are not keeping a significant secret tend to maintain close friendships. We were known in the county as the Marsh Brothers, who kept to themselves, which was not inaccurate and which was understood in the hill country tradition as a normal family characteristic, rather than a sign of something worth investigating. We were not unhappy, but we were enclosed in a way that I understand better now than I understood then. Here's why this changed everything for us, looking back. The enclosure felt like a choice, a sacrifice freely made in service of something we had decided was worth the cost. And it was a choice, and it was a sacrifice, and we made it freely. What we did not fully understand was that the cost we were paying was not just to ourselves and not just for the reasons we thought. We kept journals throughout. This was Daniel's idea, and it was one of the best ideas he has ever had, because the journals are what allowed us in 2003 to reconstruct the pattern we had missed in real time. What had been invisible in the lived experience became legible in the written record. The journals were not formal research logs. They were personal accounts, alternating between Daniel's handwriting and mine, depending on who had done the observing on a given day, with a running commentary on her behavior, her health, her moods, the weather, the state of the farm, and the 1,000 small details of daily life that matter to people who work land together for decades. We recorded things that seemed significant at the time and things that seemed trivial. And we recorded them with the consistency of men who had decided early in the process that documentation was protection. That if something went wrong, or if the secret ever had to be disclosed, the journals would be the evidence that our involvement had been responsible rather than reckless. There are 11 journals. I have them. They are stored in the fireproof lockbox that Daniel and I bought in 1985 for the farm's deed and insurance documents. And that has held the journals since the first one was filled and the second one was begun. Each journal covers between 18 months and 3 years, depending on the density of events in that period. In the fall of 2003, I pulled out all 11 journals and read them in sequence for the first time. I had read individual entries in the past, checking a date, confirming a memory, comparing notes with Daniel on a specific observation. I had never read them as a consecutive document. I read them over the course of 4 days, alone in the farmhouse kitchen, and on the fourth day, I went and got Daniel from the equipment shed where he was working on the tractor, and I put the journals on the table in front of him, and I said, "Read these, all of them. Start at the beginning." He asked me what was in them. I said, "What we missed." This is the chapter that I have sat with longest. This is the chapter that required the most conversation between Daniel and me before we agreed on how to describe it. Because what the journals revealed, read in sequence and at a distance of 2 decades of accumulated entries, is something that requires care to convey accurately, without exaggeration and without minimization. The pattern in the journals was this: every significant event on our farm over 20 years, every decision that went unusually well, every crisis that resolved more cleanly than it should have, every coincidence of timing that we had attributed to luck or preparedness or the general good fortune of men who worked hard and knew their land, had been preceded in the days or weeks before the event by a change in her behavior that we had noted and then not followed to its conclusion. I need to be specific because the general claim is too easy to dismiss. Here are 3 examples from the journals. October 1987. Daniel's entries note that she had been spending unusual amounts of time near the fence line adjacent to the lower pasture in the week before the incident in which a neighboring farmer's loose bull breached our fence and potentially faced our cattle. The breach occurred on a Saturday morning when Daniel happened to be in the lower pasture for reasons he notes in the journal as no particular reason, just wanted to check the fence, and was able to prevent what could have been a serious injury or loss. He was there because something had drawn him there. The journal does not ask why she had been near that fence for a week. The journal notes her presence there as routine and moves on. June 1991. My entries describe her apparent agitation in the days before I received a certified letter informing me of a lien against the farm property for a debt I had no knowledge of. A fraudulent claim that, if I had not acted immediately on receipt of the letter, could have progressed into a genuine legal problem. My entry from 3 days before I received the letter notes that she seems unsettled, pacing more than usual, watching the road. I had attributed this to weather. There was no weather event that week. March 1997. Both of our entries describe her unusual attentiveness in the week before Daniel's tractor accident. The accident that resulted in a broken wrist and could easily have been significantly worse. In the days before the accident, she had positioned herself near the equipment shed more consistently than at any previous point in our observation. On the morning of the accident, Daniel notes in his entry from the following week, she was sitting at the equipment shed door when he arrived. He had moved her aside, gently, to get in. He notes this as a mildly unusual behavior and proceeds to the account of the accident and the trip to the emergency room. I am not saying she predicted these events with certainty. I am not saying she had knowledge she could not have had. What I am saying, what the journals say unambiguously in the record of 20 years of daily observation, is that her behavioral changes consistently preceded significant events on this farm, and that those behavioral changes were consistently recorded by us, and that we consistently failed to connect the record of her behavior to the subsequent events. We had been for 20 years living with an early warning system, and we had not known it because we had not read our own records carefully enough to see it, but this was not the secret. This was the prologue to the secret. And when we understood this, when we had read all 11 journals and mapped the pattern and sat across from each other at the kitchen table with the evidence of 20 years laid out between us, we understood that there was a further question. A question that the behavioral pattern in the journals implied but did not answer. If she was aware of these events before they occurred, if her behavioral changes were responses to an awareness she possessed that we did not, where was that awareness coming from? We had never done this before. In 20 years of giving her access to the tree line, of watching her make her periodic trips to the eastern boundary and return, we had respected the law direction of her movement as a private thing. We had not followed her. We had not investigated where she went or what she did there. This was part of the original arrangement, implicit but understood, and we had maintained it as scrupulously as we had maintained any other part of the arrangement. After we read the journals, we went. We gave her the opportunity to prevent this. We told her, as clearly as we could manage, through a combination of gesture and the particular kind of direct held-eye communication that 20 years of close observation had developed between us, that we were going to the eastern woods and that we wanted her to come with us, or to let us go. She sat in the barn doorway for perhaps 2 minutes, watching us, with that expression I had been looking at for 20 years and that I knew as well as I knew my brother's face, the assessing, calculating expression of a mind working through a problem. Then she stood and led us into the woods. The tree line off our eastern boundary runs into a hollow that drops steeply before rising to the ridge. We had been in that hollow dozens of times as children, hunting with our father. We knew the terrain. What we did not know, what was not there when we had last spent time in that hollow, which would have been the late 1970s before we took over the farm, was what she showed us. Approximately a quarter mile into the hollow, where the slope levels briefly before dropping to a seasonal creek, there was a construction. I am going to use that word carefully. It was a construction in the sense that it had been built, that the elements comprising it had been selected and positioned with clear intentionality. It was not a shelter in the rough, stacked branches sense of the improvised structures described in most Bigfoot accounts. It was something between a marker and an archive, a carefully arranged and maintained collection of objects that covered an area of perhaps 20 feet square, organized in a way that I could not fully interpret, but that was clearly not random. There were stones, many stones, arranged in patterns that I recognized from an old interest in archaeology I had in my 20s as having structural intentionality, concentric arcs, aligned rows, the specific non-random distribution of placed rather than fallen objects. There were objects that had come from our farm, small things, things we had never noticed missing or had noticed missing and attributed to the ordinary losses of farm life. A rusted bolt, a piece of wire, a glass insulator from an old fence line we had pulled up in 1989. There were things that had not come from our farm, objects of types I could not immediately identify, things that appeared to have been brought from some distance, some of them weathered in ways that suggested they had been in the hollow for many years. And there were markings on the trees, not carvings, not deep, permanent cuts. Marks made with something that left a residue, a pigment that had faded over time but was still visible on the bark of the older beeches and chestnuts at the hollow's edges. Marks that repeated. Marks that, as I walked the perimeter of the construction and looked at each tree in turn, formed a record, a notation system of some kind that I could not read, but that I could recognize as language. Repeated symbols in variable combinations, the grammar of a written record. She had been keeping records for 20 years and possibly longer. She had been coming to this hollow and maintaining an archive that encoded, in a notation system I could not decode, the events and observations of her life on our farm and in the surrounding hills. Daniel and I stood in that hollow for a long time, not speaking, looking at what was in front of us with the particular silence of people whose understanding of a situation has just been entirely restructured. She stood at the edge of the construction, watching us, patient, still, with an expression that, in retrospect, I can only describe as the expression of someone who has decided to let you see what they really are. Here's where I need to slow down, because this is the part of the account that is hardest to convey without sounding like we are inflating what we found. I am going to try to say exactly what we concluded and no more. We spent 3 days in that hollow over the following 2 weeks. We photographed everything. We mapped the stone arrangements. We copied the tree markings as accurately as we could. We did not move or take anything. This was not a conscious decision so much as an instinct born from 20 years of respecting her space. We observed and documented. We brought the documentation home and we sat with it for a long time. What we concluded, after everything: she had not come to our farm in October 1983 because she was injured and needed shelter. She had been injured, that was real, the shoulder was real, but the barn door was not opened by accident. She had come to our farm deliberately. She had chosen us, had, in all likelihood, been watching us and assessing us for some period before October 4th, in the way that all of our subsequent understanding of these beings suggests they watch and assess before they act. She had chosen a specific farm on the eastern edge of the hill country, occupied by 2 specific people whose characters and habits she had evaluated, and she had opened the barn door and made herself findable. She had chosen to be sheltered by us, and in the 20 years that followed, she had used the position of proximity that our shelter provided, access to the network of information that flows through a working farm and its surrounding land, to maintain a record that went far beyond anything we had understood ourselves to be contributing to. The Hollow Archive was not a personal diary. Based on the quantity and organization of what was there, it was something considerably more comprehensive than one being's account of 20 years on one farm. The markings extended to trees that she could not have reached from ground level, which meant the archive was not solely her work. It had been added to by others. The Hollow was a repository, a maintained multi-contributor record of something that mattered enough to sustain 2 decades of regular, careful documentation. My experience revealed something profound in those 3 days in the Hollow, that what we had understood as a relationship of 2 brothers giving shelter to a solitary creature had been, from her perspective, something else entirely. We had been giving her something she had specifically sought, a position of proximity to human activity, to a working farm embedded in a community, to a network of information about the land and the people on it. And she had, in exchange, given us 20 years of protection so subtle that we had not recognized it as protection. We had called it luck. She was not a solitary creature finding shelter with two farmers. She was a participant in something we had never imagined, conducting work we had never known was being done, and she had lived beside us for 20 years as both a ward of our compassion and a completely autonomous agent with her own purposes and her own obligations. This is the terrifying thing. Not that she had used us, because used is too simple and too cold a word for what 20 years of genuine mutual care had been. The terrifying thing is that we had never seen her whole. We had seen the part of her that was with us, the creature in the barn, the presence at the fence line, the being whose health we tracked and whose moods we read, and we had mistaken that part for the whole. We had never known the rest of her. We had never asked. I want to describe the week after we found the hollow with as much honesty as I can, because the emotional reality of that week is part of the story, and perhaps the part most important to understanding what this kind of discovery does to the people who make it. Daniel and I are not men who discuss feelings with any fluency. We are brothers of a particular generation and a particular tradition, and our emotional vocabulary is, by the standards of the contemporary world, limited. We express care through action, through presence, through the particular forms of attention that men in our tradition use when they want to show that something matters to them. We have been doing this with each other for our entire lives. In the week after the hollow, we had very little to say to each other. We sat at the kitchen table in the evenings, and we were largely silent, which is not unusual for us. But the silence had a different quality than our ordinary silence. It had the quality of two people processing something that they do not have shared language for, and that they cannot therefore process together, and that they must therefore each process alone, even in each other's company. What I was processing, the specific grief of discovering that someone you have cared for and protected and organized your life around has been simultaneously and without any deception you can point to, something larger and more complex than the version of them you were given. The grief is not anger. It is not betrayal in the way that word usually works. She had not lied to us, had not hidden anything we had the right to know, had not broken any agreement we had made. She had simply been more than we knew. The grief is closer to the grief of discovering late in life that a parent or a sibling has had an entire inner life you never knew about. Not a hidden, shameful life. A full, complex, purposeful life that existed alongside the life you shared with them, and that was never made visible to you because you never asked the right questions, or because the right questions were not available to you in the language you had, or because some part of both of you understood that the full visibility of that life was not something the relationship could accommodate. Daniel said, on the fifth night, without preamble and without explanation of what had prompted the thought, "She's been watching over us." I said yes. He said, "We thought we were watching over her." I said yes. He said nothing else. Neither did I. That was the whole of the conversation, and it contained everything. In the spring of 2004, she left. Not dramatically, not with any indication that we could read as farewell. She was in the barn on the evening of April 19th, when I checked on her before turning in. She was not in the barn on the morning of April 20th. The eastern gate, which we had left unlatched for 20 years, was open. The sleeping area in the barn, the hay and blankets we had maintained for 2 decades, had been carefully, methodically disassembled, and the materials arranged in a stack that was too precise to be accidental. An act of housekeeping, an act of leaving a space as you found it, or better. She had been with us for 20 years, 5 months, and 16 days. We did not search for her. We did not go to the hollow. We went once, 2 weeks later, and found that it had been cleared, not destroyed, not dismantled, cleared, the stones reset to positions that appeared random unless you had seen them arranged, the tree markings covered with a natural pigment, applied with the same care that had been used to make them, the portable objects removed. The archive had been closed or relocated or continued elsewhere in ways that left no trace we could follow. The farm without her was a different farm, not worse, not better, different in the way that any space is different when a presence that has occupied it for 20 years is gone. We continued our routines. The cattle grazed, the garden grew, the seasons turned. We did not speak about her to each other for about a year, not from avoidance, but from the ordinary way that grief requires time before it can be spoken about in the past tense without the speaking itself reopening the wound. She had been with us for 2 decades. She had kept records we didn't know she was keeping, observed things we didn't know were being observed, maintained a purpose we didn't know existed. She had also, across those same 2 decades, been a presence that we fed and cared for and worried about and made decisions around and kept faith with through the slow attrition of 20 years of maintained secrecy. Both of those things were true simultaneously. Neither canceled the other. We are old men by the standards of the hill country. 61 and 58 is not ancient, but it is old enough to have outlived the sense that there is always more time to tell the important things. Our parents did not tell us everything they knew before they died, and we have lived with the gaps they left, and we do not want to leave the same gaps behind us. Our experience revealed something profound that we could not have articulated in 1983, or in 1993, or even in 2003, when we stood in the hollow and understood what we had been part of. It is something we have arrived at slowly through 20 additional years of thinking about those 20 years, and it is this. There is a form of intelligence operating in the wild places of this country, and we believe, based on everything that the Hollow Archive implied about its scope, in the wild places of the world, that is not acknowledged by any official framework we are aware of. It is not the intelligence of an undiscovered animal, subject to the protocols of wildlife biology and the management structures of national parks and wilderness designations. It is the intelligence of a civilization that has made a set of choices different from the choices human civilization has made. Choices about scale, about visibility, about the relationship between individual life and collective purpose. And that has been operating on the basis of those choices continuously and with extraordinary discipline for longer than our civilization has existed. She was not a refugee who needed shelter. She was an operative. And I use that word not to suggest anything sinister, but in the precise sense of a person operating on behalf of a larger purpose in a specific role, with specific tasks that she performed for 20 years without ever, in any interaction we had, indicating that those tasks existed. Her presence on our farm was a deployment. The archive in the Hollow was a product of that deployment. The protection she provided us, the early warnings, the attentive monitoring, the 20 years of quiet, unacknowledged management of a farm and its inhabitants was not incidental to her presence. It was part of the work. Why protect us? This is the question we have returned to most often in the years since 2004. The most honest answer we have arrived at is this: because we sheltered her. Because we made an arrangement in good faith and kept it with full commitment and asked nothing in return, except that she be safe and that the secret hold. And because whatever moral framework governs the choices of her kind, and there is clearly a moral framework, it is evident in every aspect of everything we have described, it recognizes the obligations that care creates, and it honors them. She watched over us because we watched over her. Not as payment. The word payment implies a transaction, and what we had was not a transaction. As the natural expression of a relationship that had, over 20 years of living alongside each other, become real in the only way that matters, through consistent, mutual, unglamorous care. What most people don't understand is that the terrifying discovery in the hollow was not that we had been deceived. It was the mirror image of that we had been trusted. Trusted with proximity to something that is extraordinarily careful about proximity. Trusted with 20 years of an intelligence that has been present in these hills for longer than our family has been here. Trusted with knowledge that we are now finally passing on. We are not telling this story to become famous. We are not telling it to be believed, because our belief in it is not contingent on anyone else's. We are telling it because we believe there are things in the places most people do not go that deserve to be understood differently than they are currently understood. The beings in those hills are not what the entertainment industry has made them. They are not monsters. They are not animals. They are not legend in the sense of something that did not happen. They are intelligent, organized, purposeful beings with a civilization older than recorded human history, conducting work in the wild places of the world that we are not equipped to see or to understand, that has been going on without our knowledge, and that will continue after all of us, all of the humans alive now, are gone from it. What we had was 20 years of proximity to one of those beings, and what those 20 years taught us is both specific and general. Specifically, she was watching over our farm and contributing to an archive in the hollow and sending information through whatever network connects her kind across distance. And we were both the beneficiaries of her care and the subject of her documentation. And both of those things were expressions of an intelligence and a purpose that we had consistently underestimated for 2 decades. Generally, these beings are not threats to human beings who do not threaten them. They have coexisted with human civilization for the entirety of that civilization's existence, at ranges close enough to observe and document us, without any pattern of aggression toward humans who are not attempting to harm them. The pattern is observation. The pattern is documentation. The pattern is the careful, long-term accumulation of knowledge about a species, ours, that they have been watching develop in the way that one might watch a neighbor whose choices you find concerning, but whose autonomy you respect. This is the terrifying part. Not that they are dangerous, that they are watching, that they have been watching for a very long time and keeping records of what they see, and that the records they keep in the hollows and the hill country archives that we will never have access to contain a history of our civilization as observed from the outside, a history more complete and more accurate than anything our own historians have produced, written in a notation system we have not deciphered, maintained by a people we have not officially acknowledged, in the wild places we are taking apart piece by piece without understanding what we are destroying. This creature holds a secret that is not one creature's secret. It is the secret of a civilization living alongside ours in the spaces we have not fully colonized, watching us, caring for us when care is earned, keeping records that we will probably never read, and waiting with the patience of beings who have been waiting for as long as we have been here to see what we choose to do with the world we share. We shared a farm with one of them for 20 years. We kept faith with her as well as we knew how. We are keeping faith with her now by telling you what she was and what she did and what it meant. The hills are not empty. They have never been empty. They are occupied by a patience older than anything we have built, and a wisdom we have never deserved, and a record of everything we are. Take care of what you share your land with. You may not know for 20 years exactly what you are dealing with, but it knows what it is dealing with in you. We did not fully understand her until it was too late to ask her the questions we should have asked. Don't make the same mistake we did. Pay attention, ask the questions, and take care of the wild things that choose to trust you. She knew us better than we knew ourselves. That is the secret two brothers found after 20 years. And it is the most terrifying and the most humbling thing we have ever had to hold.